Hello YouTubers and welcome back. In today's episode I'm going to look at an old protection system and speed loading system for the Amstrad CPC called Speedlock 1987. This was quite prevalent back in the day, and the guys developed and continued to develop the Speedlock system over a number of years. But we're going to focus on this and possibly one of my most favourite games, Dizzy, which incorporated this loader. Now there's a couple of things. First is that all the files needed for this tutorial are available on my blog at muckypaws.com and my GitHub at github.com/muckypaws/Amstrad CPC. Details are given in my blog. We're going to do a couple of things first. We're going to load up the disk that I've provided with all the files that you need. Dizzy Hack tutorial disk. We're going to open that, and a simple cat will show you that all the files are present. We're also going to need a copy of the Dizzy cassette, unhacked, original as is. If you've got the original, great. If not, a Google search will be your friend and you can find the files somewhere lurking around on the internet. I'm going to load up the cassette here and just hit play. So the first thing we need to do is to make sure that the image or the cassette version that we've got works. So let's just start that off. Now the purpose of the tutorial is I'm going to show you how I achieved these back in the day, back in the 1980s, using hardware and software that was available to me then. We could approach this with today's modern tools, which makes the job a lot easier, but I felt that this would be beneficial to see how we did things, or a way that we did things back in the 80s, using what was available to us then. For the purpose of this demonstration though, I am using my favourite CPC emulator, Java CPC, by my friend Marcus, or Devil Marcus as he goes by, and links will be available there. This works on Mac and Windows, but obviously this tutorial will work with your favourite emulator too. So WinApe, Retro Virtual Machine, Caprice, etc. You just need to use the files and the disks that I've provided. So here we can see that the Dizzy is loading, and you can see the familiar black and blue bars flashing on the screen. We'll just make sure that this loads all the way through. Now back in the 80s I did an awful lot of hacking, mainly for fun, mainly to see how protection systems worked, but also to see what was underlying code in the games, because books were slow to come out and the technology or the ideas behind them were sometimes outdated compared to the gaming industry, where those guys really honed their skills to make tight code. So the easiest way to learn real coding was to learn from other developers, to learn their skills, their techniques, their tricks, to squeeze every last cycle of CPU out. Now, using the power of video editing, I'm just going to fast forward all the way through to the end. And here we have our favourite little eggy yolk folk. So we know that the cassette is working as intended. So now that we've got everything that's needed, let's get cracking. Ha! Yeah, the jokes don't get any funnier than that. Righto. Okay, so first off, we're going to use a tool called Adam. Other people might have used DevPack or Maxam or any other environment, but for me, Adam was the ultimate tool. For a number of reasons. One is that it was written in self-relocating code, so I could load it at any memory address on the system and it would work. within reason, obviously. Second reason is that I could load it into one of the extended memory banks of an Amstrad CPC 6128, which meant that invariably when I made mistakes with code or crashed the machine, if I could soft reset, I could recover the environment fairly quickly, which we'll discover now. So first off, just going to check that the disk is there, and I'm going to enter the command out 7F00, 196. So I'm switching in one of the RAM banks from memory address hex 4000 to 7FFF, and I'm going to run Adam natively. If you hold down space while it's loading, you can change the default load address. So some basic housekeeping. I prefer to work in hex than decimal. I know some of you guys prefer decimal to hex, but I've always worked in decimal. So Control B will change the indicator here to show that we're working in hex. If we want to edit a file, we type L for list and hit enter, and we're here with the editor, and we've got a cursor. At the moment it doesn't do anything, but if we tap the left arrow on our keyboard, we enter edit mode. So invariably, most programs I have start with an org address. So let's say hash A00. Important thing to remember here is that there's a number of assemblers that will use nomenclature of an ampersand or a $sign to represent hexadecimal numbers, or even 0x. In Adam, it uses the hash symbol. So it may seem a little strange, but you'll get used to it. So A00, org address, labels always start in the first column, and we put in an entry to our program. So $. Dollar has the tells the assembler the current address in memory for the particular assembly listing, and then we can just put in a simple command like ret and even add a comment. There's nothing really. Hit enter again to return back to the cursor, which we can now move up and down our listing. And if we want to insert, left arrow, or if we want to come out of the editor, just hit enter again. To assemble, just press A. There's only 1 byte. To disassemble, we can disassemble using an address, or disassemble using a label with dstart. We can see any labels that we've created using X1. If we want to load a file, we use G0, file name. And if we want to write a source file, P0 to put, and then file name. And if we want to write a binary file, P2 filename.bin. It also offers a trace facility, so we can see what our routine does. Trace A00. And here we can see all of the registers, program counter, interrupt and refresh, IX, IY, stack pointer, HLD, BC, accumulator and flags. And also the Z80 CPU has a complement of those. So we see HL complement, D complement, BC complement and AF complement. Using Q to come out of the trace function. Okay, we are now going to load in our RSX. So get naught, rsx.adm. I always use the extension .adm to indicate Adam source files, although typical nomenclature is .asm, which you will find for readability on the GitHub source files. In any part of reconnaissance, we need to know as much information about the files that we're dealing with, and unfortunately Amstrad CPC didn't provide us with a way of obtaining easily the load address, length and execution address of a file. So we had to write a program, which is something I did back in the 80s. Don't worry too much about this code now. It is documented, but I will cover that off in a later blog. So I'm going to assemble that, drop to basic, initialize the RSX code, and I'm going to use the finfo command, and let's have a look. rsx.bin from disk, and it will tell you that it's a file type of 2, which means binary. It starts at address A200, has a length of 16F in hex, and it executes at A200 also. We can do this with tapes as well. So if you listen to the Dizzy cassette, you'll know that there's 2 Amstrad tape files before we get into the speed load. So let's have a look at those. So let's do tape.in or tape, and then we're going to finfo without any parameters. The program now tells us that the first file is called Dizzy, which we knew. It has a type of 2, which is binary. It is intended to load at address 3A43 in hex, has a length of A6, and an execution address of 3A43. Let's take a look at the next file. Okay, we've got an unusual file name, but Speedlock systems tended to use this, and for reasons that will become obvious later. So exclamation mark, 14 spaces, exclamation mark, or pling pling, as some people call it. Don't know why, but there we go. File type 02, binary again. Start address of hex of 40, which is where our command buffer is for basic, for typing any commands. Length of 1EE, and executes at address 40. So we know from this point forward in the cassette that it's all turbo load data, so we're not going to get anything out of this program for that. But we've got a good start. So let's go back to our assembler, and remember what I said earlier about how Adam could be loaded into extended memory to preserve its contents should there be a crash. I'm going to use, I'm just going to reset or soft reset our machine, and here I can type out 7F00196 memory. I just preserve that, call 4000, and there we go, we're back into Adam and our source code is intact. So if we crash the machine, provided that we switched out extended memory and went back to main memory, more often than not we could recover our source code. Okay, so first things first, we need to find out what's going on with the first loader. So there's a little program called get first, and it's straightforward. So what I've done here is these commands just load the BC register with 7FC0 and performs an out command. That is the same as typing in basic out ampersand 7F00, 192. We then set up a couple of parameters, a couple of registers to call the to load the header. Exchange DEHL, the firmware spec states that HL DE contains the load address, and we need to swap that over. Call BC83, BC78 to finalize the tape load. We're going to preserve BC just to get into the habit. And again, we're doing the equivalent of out ampersand 7F00, 196 to return back to the Adam environment. If we try to run this as it is, it will fail because we haven't switched or enabled tape yet, and we can't provide a 0 length file name for disk file. So we're going to jump back to basic, and I'm going to put tape, call ampersand 4000, assemble, and jump. Because the load address is at 3A43, we could actually do this from basic by lowering memory to protect any corruption from basic variables, etc., and just doing a load command. So let's have a look. We've got a bunch of instructions, and if we do a memory dump 3A43, we can see here that it is indeed Speedlock protection system 1987. So the developers did like to leave a little message in there to let us know what we're dealing with, which was always handy. We can see the exclamation mark, 14 spaces exclamation mark, which is a file name. Now, easiest way to clear a screen in Adam is just to go to the listings and back again. So let's have a look. 3A43 is where the program executed. And we've got our first point of interest really. The program swaps over DEHL and stack location before calling its first routine. Now, it may seem odd, but this is really a check to make sure that you executed the run command for the tape. So in basic, you would type run dizzy or just run, for example. If you typed load and then call, obviously, yeah, I'm still in the IDE. The variables will be set up differently. So what do you mean by that, Jason? Well, let's just have a look first. If we trace 3A43, we can see that our registers are set up could be a random value for all we know here. If we trace this, so exchange DE with HL, so HL now equals A6, exchange that with a stack pointer, so HL now contains B9A2, which is the original return address, and the stack now has A6, AD, it's loaded, so that's manipulated, that contains B1E4, and values are pushed onto the stack. You'll find that basically if we run this, so let's just preserve Adam. Oops, ampersand 3A43. If we were just to run the program, it looks like it's loading. So here we've got the familiar loading tone, so we know it's loading the second stage. And if you continue, this will either crash or it's not doing anything. So you can hear the tones, but it's not loading anything right now. So let's reset our machine and rewind it. So let's start Adam up again. So sometimes it doesn't always work. 7F00, car 196 run. So we're going to use a file called getregs.atom. It's a very simple program. All it does is write the registers to memory over here. To get some AF register, you've got to push it to the stack and pop it into another register, because you can't write AF, only the accumulator. So we preserve the registers. I'm going to switch back memory and jump back to memory address 4000. So if we assemble that, if we have a look at the memory, if I did it properly in the first place, we would know that HL contains the value 45, DE A00, BC 20FF, and the accumulator. Oops. So here we go. Accumulator is 0 and the flags are at 48. So that was from calling it from a program. Now if we assemble it and then put to getregs.bin, okay, we're going to reset and then we're going to run the program getregs.bin, which will hopefully drop us back into Addon. We've got different values for HL, D, BC, which is shown here, and if we go into trace mode, we'll see here that HL is ABFF, D is 40, BC is B0FF, and the accumulator is FF, and the flags are set accordingly. Now you might be asking yourself, well, where did all that? Where did that all? If you have a look at the blog, I've created I've taken a snapshot of the firmware guide, which shows that when you run a program in this way, the Amstrad clears as much memory as it possibly can. It uninitializes most of the ROMs other than basic, and it provides you with the top of memory and the first memory address that you can use, etc. This is a trick that is well known to the developers. So let's come out of here. If we try to get our file, let's say get reg, it'll ask for press play on tape because the disk ROM hasn't been enabled. So let's go back to Addon. Okay, now then, if we do our get first program here, jump back to tape, so we know what to set our registers at, so that we can have a look at this code a little bit further. And we're going to set these up. So .hl, .d with 40, BC, and now we're going to trace our routine to see what is actually going on. So HL now equals 40, D equals ABFF. The stack is set up with address 40. So if we were to return from this this program, it would try to execute at address 40 in hex. We know that the DE is set to BB00 now, and that is pushed to the stack, and that is quite interesting. And now we jump into the first call call routine. Why is this interesting? Well, this means that when this program is finished doing what it's doing, control will return back to 3A4E, but this BB00 is the next address to be executed, possibly. Okay, so let's have a look at 3AB0. And really, I went a little bit too quickly there. This is simple inks initialization code. So we've got a table at 3AD5 for a loop count of 16. We're going to set the accumulator to 0, and we're going to increment that up to 0F. We're going to load the value in the address pointed to by HL, and we're going to let C also equal B, because remember the Amstrad allows flashing colours and this game doesn't use those. Call to BC32 is a firmware call to set inks, and it's going to repeat. At the end of the table, the next byte in there is the screen mode, I think, BC0E, which will be mode 1. And then we've got some very sneaky code here. So the next 2 bytes in the table are effectively poked into address AC00 before returning control. Okay, so we can trace all of this, but I'm not going to. Let's have a look at the memory table. Here we can see the inks are set. So ink 0 is 0, ink 1 is 26, ink 2 is 6, which is, so that's white, that's red, and that will be green, value 18 in decimal. So it's the same as the basic command ink 1, comma 26, ink 2, comma 6, etc. The rest is 0 because mode 1 only has 4 colours. The next byte was the 01, which was the mode, and then the next pair that was loaded was a C900. So if we disassemble that, we can actually execute this to see exactly what's happening. So hang on, before we do that, let's have a look at AC00 as it stands now. There's nothing in there in memory at the moment, and this is reserved static use for variables for any program that really needs it. We can execute this because it's not really doing anything nefarious. It's just setting up inks and colours like so. And then if we disassemble AC00, it now has those 2 bytes, a no op and a return instruction. It seems a little bit odd, but we will get to that. So let's go back to our loader program. Once it's set up the inks, the next bit, and I don't understand why they didn't put this in with the ink, this sets the border colour, and this will just load in the value 0 so that you've got a border of black. Load A with FF and BC6B. This simply tells the cassette manager not to display any messages on screen now, so into sort of like quiet mode, so to speak. And this code you might be familiar with. So we've got a load B of 10 in hex, which is 16 decimal, which is a file name length. We've got a file name in 3A7C, so let's just check that. 3A7C for 16 bytes is our exclamation mark, 14 spaces, exclamation mark. We push BC, HL and the accumulator onto the stack before continuing with the load. The JR0 carries we don't need to be overly concerned about. That's just a fail-safe. So if the cassette failed for whatever reason, or the user hit escape, basically the code will self-destruct and reset itself back to the Amstrad screen. Not a lot the developers can do here because the code's clearly not loaded correctly, or there's been a problem of some description. We can see the familiar exchange DEHL. HL is the load address, which will most likely be 40, and then we finalize the loading and close the cassette. But here's where it gets weird. So we pop AF, which we pushed here. Remember, everything has to be balanced, and that will have a value, most likely, well, it will have a value of 2 because we know from our recon that it was a binary file. And F, the flags will be set, but because there was no carry, the command was successful. We know that carry will be set, and that's going to be quite important to remember. It's often one that's overlooked. HL at the time contains the address of the cassette buffer, but it appears that because these aren't balanced, so we've pushed the length, we've pushed the cassette buffer into memory, the return address is going to return into the cassette buffer, and that doesn't feel right, does it? So what we're going to do is we're going to add an intercept here, and the best place to return control to our program is here at 3A76 with the instructions disable interrupts, pop accumulator and flags, and return, which gives us exactly 3 bytes that we need for a JP instruction, a C3, and then 2 bytes, the LSB and MSB, to where to jump return control. So let's go back to basic, and as you can see here, we're still in mode 2, but Amstrad thinks it's in mode 1. Oops. Let's clear the screen. Okay, so I've got a little program called getDec1.atom. Again, the code will be familiar with you. We're going to switch out the RAM bank. We're going to call our load routine to load the first file, Dizzy, from tape. We're going to preserve the stack data. We don't need to do that, but on some protection systems we do, but this is just an extra. We're going to load in our patch. So C3 is the hex code for a jump instruction, and then back is the address where we want to jump back to, and we're going to poke that basically into 3A76, which we identified earlier. We're going to set up the registers to make it look as though we've run it from direct rather than a load instruction. This is familiar. We're just loading with a B of 0. We're just loading the first file that we come across, and this is our back routine. So here, this is where we want control to return to. So we're going to preserve BC, switch in the memory bank, and jump back to Adam at address 4000. So let's assemble that. Let's do a tape in, and then jump. So we're going to rewind our tape. Because we've passed control to the program for the time being, it's now going to do exactly what it was told to do, which is to set the screen mode, set the colours, clear the screen, and load in the next file. And here we go. We've got control returned back to Adam. And if we type in T to go into trace, we can see here that the stack is now set up as B11F, which is where the tape header resides. That is the length, so that was BC, and BB00 was the return address set up very earlier in the program. let's have a look at B11F. It looks like a tape header, doesn't it? You've got 16 bytes for the file name. You've got file type, you've length, you've got all the information that conforms to the Amstrad specification. Now, if we disassemble B11F, I mean, we're basically disassembling text, aren't we? You know, this is a file name. But wait, it's a very clever file name. So 21, hex for an exclamation mark in ASCII, is a load HL command, and that loads with 2020. The next instruction is to jump, if not 0, to B144. Well, we know that the 0 flag isn't set, so we know that the next execution address will be at B144. But don't take my word for it. First off, because we would have returned back to the execution address, we need to increase the stack by 2. So as the stack is at BFF4, we're going to type in .sp, hash BFF6. So this will now look as though it's the address has been popped off the stack and we've returned back to execution, which is here. B11F. So let's trace it through and see what happens. So we load HL and then we jump to B144 with a NOP instruction. Now we've got a rotate right accumulator, and this is why I said earlier that the carry flag was important. So the value of A was 2. We've rotated right, which is a divide by 2 instruction, so we should have 1, right? Well, not quite. The rotate right accumulator rotates the carry flag bit into the most significant bit of the accumulator. So we're basically setting the accumulator to hash 81. And here we have time critical code. Once we're using the R register with interrupts disabled, everything at this point becomes CPU timing critical. Let's just have a look at the code from B144 before we continue. So here we have the initialization for R. We're going to restore BC and HL. So BC was the length and HL I think would be the address BB00, but we will trace that through in a moment. D equals HL, and then the stack pointer is manipulated again with whatever is in HL. Load the accumulator with whatever the interrupt is at the moment. Doesn't make much sense. It's just a time waster, I think. There's a call to AC00, and then we load the accumulator with the refresh register, which always increments as the CPU processes instructions. It's one that we don't it's one that takes care of itself, and we'll see why. We're going to XOR the data, load it into back into memory, and then the LDI instruction is basically says copy whatever is in HL into DE for 1 iteration, and it will decrement, so it'll be BC equals BC minus 1. Then we've got a return if parity odd, or return if parity even. This the parity bit is set on an LDI instruction when BC equals 0. Otherwise, we're going to decrement this stack pointer and return to another address. And this all seems very odd, but I'll explain. So if you remember, we set up RA, so we've got as far as B148. So let's trace now from B14A. I'm going to pop BC, which was the length of the next cassette file, the exclamation mark. Pop HL, which was the return address of BB00 that was pushed earlier. And as I said, DE equals HL with these commands. So here we go. Now exchange stack pointer with HL. So this was a sneaky swap. If you remember, 40 was pushed very much earlier on in part 1. The stack now has a return address of BB00, but HL now points to 40, which interestingly is the load address of the next portion of code. did we have a look at that? So if we have a look at what was loaded in the second loader, we can see here's the code, and if we try to disassemble it, it doesn't make much sense right now. And that is because it's all encrypted or encoded. So let's let's continue from B14F. So loaded A, I, call this static variable memory space, which is interesting because if you notice here, by making a call, we push onto the stack the next address to execute, which is B154. And all this does is perform a return instruction. It also wastes a couple of cycles. So again, if we try to put anything in this routine to check, we will throw out our decryption. We now load the accumulator with the R register, and one of the downsides with Adam here is that the R register itself isn't maintained. So we're going to corrupt the code one way or another, but we're just going to run this trace through just for fun, really. So we're going to XOR with the contents of memory in HL, store that back. So if we can see that we've got new data there. So if I disassemble that, that's no longer an RST instruction. So let's continue back with B157, LDI, and then we've got a ret PO. Well, BC, although it's been decremented here, HL and D have been incremented by 1, that instruction won't, that criteria won't be met. So we decrement the stack pointer twice. Remember this address, B154? Well, parity, if it's not odd, has got to be even by default. So it returns back, and look where we are. We're in a loop. Load A with R, and it will just continue until BC equals 0, and then it will return to this address, BB00. Now let's have a look. This is all firmware, so this should have been a reset, an RST instruction, but obviously it's being corrupted now with what we're doing. So how do we get around this? And that's a very good question. What we're going to do is we're going to add a new intercept. So I'm going to I'm going to restore the firmware area. So if I disassemble BB00. There we go, that's what it should look like. This may or may not work. So we're going to rewind the cassette again. Okay, so remember the program that we did to patch? If you look at the tutorial, what I've done is I've copied the code that is doing all the decryption right now. And in order to do so, I've also overridden or set up the values as we would expect, so B, C, D, H, L, and push those onto the stack accordingly. This way, when this instruction here is executed, control is returned back to ourselves, and that was done here. So we're going to go back, return control to back 2, which is pushed onto the stack, and back 2 is our familiar code. Now I've added some additional instructions here for Adam, because we're now overwriting the firmware area. We need to ensure that we can get back into Adam. And although Adam doesn't use firmware, when you initialize it at its first call address, it does. So the way we get around this problem is when we enter the program from Adam, because we're going to execute it from our IDE, We're going to pop off the stack the return address that it requested from where this program was called, sorry, and we're going to override the jump instruction. So if I do this and then bring take, oops. Let's see if the, oh no, the code is still there. So there we go. Okay, yeah, I probably should explain. I removed the these three commands: exchange D, HL. Sorry, exchange stack pointer with HL, and these with no ops. Now, I mentioned about the CPU timing being critical. As it turns out, a 00 byte takes exactly the same amount of time as these three instructions do. So replacing them with 3 zeros meant that I could basically take control at this point. And that's all explained, hopefully, in the blog. So let's go once again. We're going to load our program up from the beginning. I mean, ultimately, we could modify the program without having to reload everything because it's all in memory now, but it's good practice, really. It's a bit of a ball ache, admittedly, but once you get the hang of this, you'll start loading the loaders to disk, copying them to disk so that you can load them quicker. But for now, for this tutorial, we're just going to keep rewinding the cassette and loading the data. Okay, now then, if we just have a look at the stack. Yeah, that's corrupt as fuck. We're going to disassemble 40. And we see here the code is different again. So let's have a look. And look at that. The developers have left us a message. Bug off. Yeah, very nice. Thanks, fellas. Sorry, much needed coffee there, fellas. And fellowettes. The developers would often put in messages in their code, motivational speeches, I like to think of them as, and also to show off their technological prowess. So bug off is obviously you can see that, but if we disassemble from address 40, these again valid instructions, so they could get away with that, but we then get into the actual code here where we decrement the stack pointer again. We load HL. Well, actually, these are called illegal opcodes or undocumented opcodes of the Zilog Z80 CPU. This will actually load the high byte of IY and the low byte of IY with these values, which will turn out to be another return address. So remember, this code is being copied into BB00. There we go, we've got the same code, courtesy of the LDI and XORing that went on. So if we were to trace BB00 now, we will corrupt it. As you can see here, IY is loaded with BCC0 and the stack pointer is swapped out, so the final return address will jump to this code location. Again, to ensure that there is no tampering as such, there's an offset into the current code at BB00. Whereby what was in the stack there should have been BB00 down here. It's just because we've messed around with it, unfortunately. But it will add 46. Actually, I'll tell you what we'll do is we will start BFF 0246. Is that right? I don't know, is there one way to find out? Oops. I ballsed it up. Oh, what have I done? What have I done? Oh yes, sorry. Dart stack pointer hash BFFA. There we go. That's now correct. You just can't get the staff these days, can you? Right. So what the program was doing was it decremented the stack pointer to find out where its execution address was. In this case, it was BB00, which is where it should have returned to. It's exchanged the next address as BCC0 back onto the stack. We're going to load the BC register with 46, which is an offset. Add IY to BC, so that becomes BB46. Again, two illegal opcode instructions, which basically now have set the registers accordingly. It's loaded the E or the lower byte with the lower byte of IY, and same, so D now equals IY. BC equals 1A8, which is another length. Load A comma I, call if parity odd. And then we're going to go back into this loop of load A with AR, XOR, etc, etc. Hopefully I've explained this bit a little bit better in the blog, but there we go. And then we've got this return address. So if we were to have a look at BCC0 right now, it's all gobbledygook. Now there's a number of ways that we could tackle this. But simple, or keep it simple, is what we should do. And here is what's interesting. If we go back to the original or the first decoder, all it's doing is XORing a value and putting it back. So it reads a value, XORs it with a fixed value with whatever's held in R at the time, and puts it back. There's no feedback, so it doesn't use the result of the last XOR and perform a calculation to modify. So it basically means that there's no detection. We can't corrupt the whole thing. And if we have a look at the address down here, BCC0, we know that that is a return fixed address. Okay, so we can calculate, and I've shown in the blog that actually there's an offset of, I think, 10 in decimal between the R register incrementing each time. But I'm not going to go down that route. We're going to go with the path of least resistance, which is to poke 49 plus 2 to get to the BC offset. So that's 4B with 0, 0 and 4E with 0, 0 to see what bytes are needed to XOR. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rewind the cassette again, and I'm going to restart the computer. Right, so get deck 2. So what we're going to do is, you're now familiar with this program as it's getting bigger. We patch the first loader, set up our registers as we would expect, load the file in. Now then, before we decode the the first routine, we're going to XOR the accumulator, so that's A equals 0. We're going to poke 4B and 4E in hex with the value 0. And then we're going to call the decode 1 program, which we had earlier. Okay, so I'm going to do that. Tape, call 4000, assemble, jump, press play. I'm sure you're familiar now with the tones. Okay, control has been returned back to us. So if we have a look at the code now, we can see here that the values provided are FB and 99. So we know that if we XOR our address with these two values, we should get the correct address. So let's try it, shall we? So here we go. So rather than XOR A, we're going to add in this command: load A, comma, back to, divided by 256, XOR'd with FB. And we're going to load A with back to, oops, and 255 to get the lower, to mask off the lower byte of the address, and XOR that with 99. So we've got the value of 5B and C1, which will be poked into the loader's second decoder before execution. So if all goes well, we should have a results address to point back to our routine here at back 2. Hopefully you've got that so far. So I'm just going to assemble that. I'm going to start again. So tape in again. Okay, so now we're back. Let's have a look. And here we have it. The IX is now being pointed to A058, which should be our address here, A058, which will return control to Adam. Now here's the best bit with everything that you've now learnt. So let's have a look at that loader at BCC0. Okay, we've not decrypted that yet because we've not called the decryption routine. So we need to do this. So I'm going to reset the machine again, rewind the cassette, okay, now that we know that that works, that we can patch into our address, what we don't need to do now is run decode 1. So we're going to patch the piece of code in the second loader, and rather than call decode 1, we're just going to simply pop AF and return as expected. And we can now get rid of the decoder code. We don't need it, it's superfluous. Boom, gone. Okay, so okay, back to tape. Oops, help if I could spell, wouldn't it? Okay, so if we have a look at BB00, you can see control now return back to our program at A056, which is basically switch Adam back in and jump. So let's have a look at BCC0, and here we have a decoded first loader, and it looks like we've got some more code to load at BF00. With a length of 47 and a call to BC4C. Next one looks like a screen address at C00. So let's have a look at BC4C. And here we've got a push IX, a call to BB67. There isn't a pop IX, which tells me it's going to continue execution at BF00. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up the parameters. So we can trace that if we want. We're not going to jump at BC4C, but we are going to jump to BC4E, which is the remainder of the loader. Okay, and let's have a look and see what we've got now. Have we got more encryption? No, we haven't. We actually have the final loader. So we've got a call here, the loader at BB67, the actual loader, and that loads the screen, the title page. That's the screen address for 4,000 hex bytes or 16K. The next part, we're going to get data from memory from a pointer at BF3C, 3E. We then make a check to see, is that the last file? If not, we're going to continue with loading the data BF40, BF42, BCB. Again, another check before switching off the cassette motor, loading the execution address at BF44, and restoring the firmware block and jumping into the game. So let's have a look at these. So BF3C, oops. So we see here that we're going to have a load at 40 hex for a length of 3862. The next set of addresses at 1442 is going to load in at 38A3 for a length of 64AE, and the jump address at BF44 is 73B1. So we know what the execution address is of the game, and if we just ran this would load the game, and we've basically cracked Speedlock 1987. However, now that we've got this far, I mean, it would be rude not to transfer the game to disk, wouldn't it? Surely. And you're in luck. So again, I'm going to reset. You can see my typing is going to pot now. We're going to get a nice little file called toDisk. Again, you're familiar with our patch code that we've now been extending. Here's our actual patch. So we poke those 2 bytes in at those 2 addresses that will return control to us. That's interesting. It's because I forgot to new, didn't I? To disk.adam. Wondering what was going on there. I'd actually concatenated the two files. So here we go. We go to back to. We've now modified that routine to call BC4E to load in the loader code. And we're now going to patch in our save code in at BF44. Remember that final jump? So once we've loaded in the final loader here, we're going to patch the jump address when the game is loaded to go to our save code. I've also added, for convenience now, some extra code for RSXs. So as we're on a 6128 and we're going tape to disk, I'm going to make it easy rather than have to keep jumping into basic in and out for adding in the tape command or the disk command, and I'll cover that off at a later date. But the save code, basically at this point the firmware block has been reinitialized by the Speedlock loader. We're going to set the disk mode, we're going to save the title page, we're going to save the game. So remember, it started at address 40. Its length, you might argue, is 64AE plus 3862, but the second or the third part of that load starts at an address +1. So we need to make sure that we cover all those bytes. Execution address is 73B1. We're going to call the save, so we're going to save that to disk and jump into the game when we're finished. And our save routine is fairly straightforward. What we've done is we set up a single file name. I've called this dizzy0.bin, and what we'll do is we'll increment the 5th byte of that. So dizzy0 will become dizzy1 on the first go. The file name is loaded into HL. The parameters were passed to save, and we're just going to write all that data to disk. So let's assemble it, and let's jump to it. And if all goes well, we will end up with a fully transferred disk. Now, what I'm going to do is using the power of video editing, I'm going to fast forward all these bits because you've seen it a gazillion times already. And there we go. The game's now written to disk, and it's running as you would expect. So we have 100% hacked the game, or hacked the protection system at least, not the game. Okay, we're going to reset. And we have Dizzy written to disk. So we can check this out. We can do load Dizzy1. There we have the loading screen, obviously without the colours. And we can run Dizzy2 because we set the execution address up in the save file. So if all has gone well. But wait, apart from the colours, something's not right. Let's try something. Ink 0, 0, ink 1, 26, run. Dizzy 2. And we've got the same blue colours again. If you remember earlier, a run command will reinitialize the Amstrad system with as much memory as possible, disabling ROMs and restoring back to system defaults wherever possible. So what we need to do is write a loader. Thankfully, I've created one for you. So let's jump back into Adam. Okay, so we've got a new firmware call, BCCE. Now, I've got to cater for two circumstances. One is if you load and then call BE80 from BASIC, or if you run it from disk. And if we're running it from disk, we need to ensure that the disk operating system is available. So this command here, you see is familiar. HL sets the highest point of memory, D the lowest point of memory. AMSDOS is always in ROM 7. If you've got modified hardware, then obviously you'll need to change that. But we initialize AMSDOS ROM. We're then going to set up mode 1. The border colours are black. We're going to set the inks up. We only need to do 4. I could have done 4 calls to BC32, but I've left it as is. We're going to call load twice. Our load routine, and our load routine should look familiar, except this time we've provided a file name of Dizzy0, which we then increment. So we load the title page, load the game, and then jump to the game code. We get a bad memory. Why is that? We're originating or orging our assembly at BE80, a popular location that we used to use back in the day. Now Adam protects itself by not allowing you to assemble above a certain point. So we're going to go back into BASIC. I'm going to clear the screen for this. Because Adam is loaded at hex address 4000, we're going to poke 4051 with 255. This is documented in the Adam manual, so it's not something I've come up with. The developer was very helpful in that respect. Now if I assemble it, there we go. So I'm going to put 2 dizzy.bin to disk. Jump back to BASIC. I'm going to reset and then run Dizzy. Now we have the colours now set up. We've got our loading screen. And again, congratulations! You have now defeated Speedlock 87 for the game Dizzy. My final thoughts before closing is that Speedlock was designed more for speed loading, I think, rather than as a real protection system, because the data wasn't encrypted. The data wasn't, in a way that couldn't easily be defeated, and the Speedlock 1987 system could be defeated with 5 pokes, 3 to redirect code to an address to return control back to us, and then the second pair of pokes to return control back to us again after all the decryption had completed. So yeah, I mean it was designed really, I think, as a speed loader rather than a protection system. Tape-to-tape copiers were prevalent back in the playground in the 80s, and Speedlock didn't give you any protection against that whatsoever. So this was more about, I think, limiting copies to disk maybe, or just a marketing gimmick. But the speed loader definitely had a benefit compared to the load times that we used to have to wait for back in the day. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, at least. Any questions or any feedback, please drop them in the comments below. Thanks for listening, and remember, check out my website, muckypaws.com, or my merchandise website at muckypawslabs.com. Thanks for tuning in.